Hi, this is Chris Castle, and you're listening to Your Morning Coffee, the podcast with Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchert. Weekly music news for the new music business.
From Billboard, politicians hate Spotify's discovery mode. Managers love it. For now.
From Billboard, why are there so few new hits in 2022?
From Music Business Worldwide, Latin music is on course to generate over $1 billion in the U.S. in 2022.
And another from Music Business Worldwide, judges in the U.S. have hinted that the mechanical royalty rate paid to publishers and songwriters for vinyl sales should rise. The major labels' lawyers have come out swinging. Oh, yeah, coming out swinging. All right, Jay, let's get in the move. Let's do our stretches. We are ready because here we go.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand! Your morning coffee is on the air. On the air. On the air. On the air. On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Jay, here we are, episode number 88, double eights.
88.
Can you believe it? We are marching towards episode 100.
I know, that's going to be fun.
And speaking of fun, we
Yeah.
would be remiss if we didn't mention, and I will let you lead it because you really did the work to make this happen.
Well,
Talk about what we did earlier this week.
we have a special kind of bonus episode that we're going to drop on our listeners pretty soon here this week. Mike and I had the pleasure of sitting down with Merck Mercuriadis from Hypnosis. We talk about him almost every week and his company and what they're up to and what's going on in the business. But it is a fascinating discussion, and we hope you'll all tune in. Again, it's just kind of a special bonus episode of our conversation this week with Merck Mercuriadis.
And it was fun. Oh, it was fun. And he is a hoot. And boy, that guy. And listen, at his core, he is a music fan. You know, we were talking just briefly with him. Oh, God, hardcore. He was talking about some of the things he was listening to at the moment and getting on vinyl. And, you know, again, this guy comes from such a pure place in terms of fandom and just appreciation. And he's such a great advocate. You know, you worked with him for a bit.
I did, not directly.
Yeah.
I worked at Sanctuary when he was a CEO, and I got to meet him one night. He actually managed Guns N' Roses.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Guns N' Roses with the team at Madison Square Garden when I was working at Sanctuary, and had a chance to just, say hello to Merck. But then years later, he was managing Elton John, and he came in for a meeting at Universal Music Enterprises, and I got to see him again. I don't, claim to know him well or anything, but I've certainly followed his career.
Yeah.
And it's quite remarkable. But what I thought was really interesting was, remember before we hit record on that interview, talk a little bit about what was going on.
Oh, well, we were just, as you do in these things, you kind of start comparing notes and talking about stuff. But he just, we just, again, jumped right into music and the things that we're passionate about, artist-wise and song-wise and album-wise. And you just get the feeling it's like, this guy's, it's like we all do when you sit down, you just you go back to being a kid, like when you first got into music. And one of the things that we noticed, we actually didn't get a chance to talk to him about this, but early as early in his childhood, he got into Kiss, and that is kind of a connection point for all three of us. And so it's just it was basically, I would say that we immediately connected on music, and it was just like. It's just like one of your buddies, even though I'd never met him. And it was a real treat, really had a great time. It could have gone for another 2 hours.
Easily. And I sent him a note afterwards just saying that the next time we connect, Mike and I want to come over and see your record collection.
Yes.
And, it'll be like the movie High Fidelity.
Oh, exactly right. So we're Jay and I are pretty excited to share it with everyone, and it was really a treat. Boy, it was really fun.
Yeah, watch your feed this week. We're going to drop that special kind of a bonus episode interview with Mark.
Indeed. And some of the things that we're going to talk about today, some of the articles were some of the things that Jay and I spoke about with Merck. So it'll be interesting to kind of hear what's going on in that space. By the way, the guy that I get to talk to every week about all this fun stuff is none other than my good buddy Jay Gilbert. He is the co-founder of music marketing and strategy company Label Logic. He's the curator of the Your Morning Coffee newsletter and a former executive with Universal, Sony, Warner Music Groups, and Fox Entertainment, because he got tired of music just for a little bit there. Jump over to film.
Oh, yeah, it was a good experience. And Mike here, my brother from another mother, is a longtime host of Sound and Vision Radio, formerly of SST Records, which there's a new book coming out we need to read and talk about.
Yes.
It's out. I mean, I saw it.
Yes.
I need to get it. SST Records, Warner Music, Capital EMI, and Universal. And just like Paul McCartney, Elliot Easton, Jimi Hendrix, and Kurt Cobain, he plays guitar left-handed. How does that affect your piano playing? Does it change anything?
Well, first of all, assuming that I play piano, I'm more of a piano owner and a guitar owner. So
you take that back.
It's funny, it's the great.
Do you play
handicap.
the bass line better?
You would think I would be a better left hand. No, I'm not at all. But with guitar, that's the thing. It's not really it's a whole different thing. I don't know how else to explain.
Do you play a guitar just turned upside down like some people do, or is it really strung correctly?
I string it left-handed, but I can play a bit strung upside down because I worked in college. I worked in a music store and sold guitars, so
that's crazy.
I learned to play strung upside down as well. It's bizarre, but it feels right. Feels right, Jay. By the way, without our sponsors, Jay, we could not do this every week. So let's, of course, give a big shout out to the folks that help bring the party.
Let's do it. First off, Music Business Association. It's a 4-day Music Biz 2022 conference agenda, and it's just been announced. It's taking place May 9th through the 12th at the JW Marriott in Nashville. I'll be there hosting a panel or two, and looking forward to seeing everybody there, along with the returning favorites like the Metadata Summit, Next Gen Now, DSP Workshops, Brand Summit, just to name a few. You'll find timely new additions for 2022, including conversations on NFTs, gaming, immersive music experiences, catalog acquisitions, and much more. Visit musicbiz.org.
Mm-hmm. Also sponsored by Hypebot. Since 2004, Hypebot has chronicled the new music industry and the trends and technologies that are changing how music is discovered, consumed, marketed, and monetized. It is edited daily by founder Bruce Houghton with help from Alana Bonilla. Hypebot and sister blog Music Think Tank are published by live music discovery and marketing platform Bands in Town. And you betcha, Bands in Town, over 65 million live music fans trust Bands in Town to get personalized concert alerts, recommendations, and messages from their favorite artists. It is the #1 artist service platform connecting over 550,000 artists with their super fans. Managers, labels, agencies, and artists access their own dashboard to manage and promote their tour dates across all platforms. Big thanks, Music Business Association, Bands in Town, Hypebot. Couldn't do it without you guys. So
we sure appreciate it.
Yes, indeed. But so, Jay, let's jump into it because we've got so many things to talk about. And some of this is pretty dense stuff. It's a lot of the things, again, we talked about with Merck, but it is the business. And so let us jump in. The first story is from Billboard. Politicians hate Spotify's Discovery Mode. Managers love it for now. And we talked about Discovery Mode last week, and we're going to talk about it again. And As you recall, last week we talked about we mentioned that members of Congress are worried about the long-term effects of Spotify's new program. The words that people keep using is a word that has been around for a very long time. That is payola. Do you think does it feel payola-ish or payola-esque
Well,
to
they
you?
talk about in this article how it's not payola, which we lovingly refer to as playola, where you pay for being placed on a playlist. And typically that's user-curated playlist, by the way. And so, because it's, the airwaves belong to the public, so that's against the law for that to not disclose, when you're being paid for placement. It's a gray area when it comes to streaming, right? And you're right. We talked about this last week. Spotify was was on the receiving end of a scolding, from several members of Congress, if I can speak. I need another cup of coffee. We believe that one of your new music promotion programs, Discovery Mode, is another troubling move by your company that sacrifices honesty in the name of profit. That was a quote from representatives, Yvette Clarke, Judy Chu, Tommy Cordinas. They wrote that in a letter. So they're looking at this like it's payola, like it's playola. But as this article points out, there's a lot of artist managers and labels, small labels, that have been part of this beta. This hasn't rolled out to everyone yet, but it's been going on for about a year, and there are a lot of people who are using it, and they're saying, there's kind of been mixed results. Some of them have been getting tremendous lift in their streams. Others, some lift, but maybe not tremendous. But they also argue that, as more people are allowed in this, it's going to dilute its effectiveness.
Yeah, and the article talks about kind of the race to the bottom, and don't forget, if you participate in this, you are accepting a lower stream rate. And so
Right.
it's not a cash payment up front, but it's basically getting less for your streams to participate in the program. And but again, one of the managers said if Spotify's mission is to prevent gatekeepers from stopping good music from making it to the top, Discovery Mode is definitely doing that, says one manager. We first started using it a year ago and saw incredible results, adds an indie label head. And one particularly effusive manager of a pop act said Discovery Mode is a brilliant tool, amazing for marketing music. So there are some huge fans out there. As the article pointed out, which is interesting, is that many of the managers that they spoke with for this article were not aware that these Congress people had written a letter, criticizing it. But they were talking about being able to pump their streams up as much as 200 or 300%. So that is not insignificant.
That's something, and it doesn't surprise me that they weren't aware of this letter. It's fairly new, and frankly, what you're looking at is a decrease in revenue versus an increase in plays. So you have to kind of balance those two things. But one of the quotes that jumped out at me was it won't enhance a track that's not already streaming. So you're not gonna. It's like throwing gasoline on your fire. If you've got something that's gaining momentum, because they go on to talk about some people who were invited into this beta are dropping their entire catalogs into this program.
Right.
And they're saying that's really not what this is for. This is for you to pick your focus tracks and your key artists and things that deserve to be heard more, and maybe you're picking up a little bit of steam, and this will kind of throw a little fuel on that fire. It's not meant to just take something that isn't interesting and make it interesting.
Exactly. But of course, no matter what, as one of these big quotes in the article says, if people are getting boosted, you have to compete. So what is that? And this has always been the issue with payola, with any sort of marketing things that we've done historically in the business, which is, hey, you're doing that, I'm going to raise you and do this. And so you've got this super competitive environment where there's just so few chairs at the table. Yeah. So what happens when that happens, though, of course, is if everybody is doing it, then suddenly you've got this uniform, essentially lower rates that are being paid to lots and lots of artists. And that's certainly what has the attention of the members of Congress. Is like, whoa. And the Artists' Rights Alliance.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and the Artists' Rights Alliance, which has also come out and said, Nat, this is not good.
Yeah, this reminds me of the world of radio and radio promotion, only in that if everybody's doing it, it dilutes the power of doing it. It says here, in a world of radio, for example, overall labels would be better if everyone cooperates and refuses to pay for airplay, radio promotion, explains Gabriel Rossman, an associate professor at UCLA who has studied payola. But at any given time, no matter what you're doing, I have the incentive to pay. If you're not paying a bribe, and I get all the airplay. And if you're paying bribes and I also pay a bribe, then at least I get some airplay. Yeah. So there is some similarities with that, although I'm not saying that you're paying a bribe with this program, but by giving up some of your royalties for this added exposure, you are paying, just not directly. But what I like about this program is that it's so challenging to come up with funds for, let's say, radio promotion or for targeted online advertising for new and developing artists, especially, and even some middle-class artists. This is a way for them to get some promotion without paying directly.
It does level the playing field in some ways. You potentially, right? I mean, potentially. Yeah. But as the article goes on to say, it says even some of the managers and label heads who object to discovery mode have started to use it, which offers potential support for the race to the bottom theory. One of them said, I was advocating from the beginning that they shouldn't do this at all. You're poking a hole in the dam. But if people are getting boosted, you have to compete in that environment, as we started talking about. So he's testing discovery mode for his acts. It makes me uncomfortable, he says.
Yeah, I think a lot of them feel that way. Yeah. But then you have to look at the other side, where, they say it's not hard to find managers that have a really positive results. Quote, we've had artists go from 5,000 streams a day to 100,000 streams a day, one of them said. We've seen hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue created. We saw it around 6 months of growth. And that comes back to what I said a minute ago. It's that decrease in revenue versus the increase in plays.
Yeah, and it says one of the paragraphs says a different label leader said several of his acts saw daily streams jump by a factor of 2 to 3. It's been really awesome for pop and dance music, according to a manager. He said another manager of pop acts that was earning even more daily streams saw a jump of a similar magnitude, and a third manager has seen sizable gains on songs that were already earning more than 500,000 streams a day. So as you mentioned, this is really meant to be gasoline on an already smoldering campfire.
Exactly.
So it's not it's not going from 0 to 500,000 streams a day. It's going from maybe 100,000 to 500,000 streams a day.
Yeah, I think it's important to point out that this won't enhance a record that's not streaming. One of the label head adds that where it has an impact is viral records or songs that listeners are already saving and adding to their personal libraries. If you're running it effectively, the executive said, you're going to make money no matter what.
Yeah, exactly. Just in general, with the artists you're working with, what is your take on discovery mode for your specific artists?
Well, I'm not running any right this moment, but I can tell you that the conversations I've had, with my friends that are doing it, that they are seeing lift, but it's kind of all over the map. There's some where they're getting huge lift and some where they're not getting huge lift. But I think if you're not dumping a catalog on there, if you're selective about what you're placing in the program, it can be very effective. I'm just curious, what happens when the floodgates open and it's not in beta and it's not in a test, and you get thousands and thousands of tracks that are now kind of in this program and being served up to people in maybe their Discover Weekly, Release Radar, radio, and in some of these personalized playlists, which for those who don't know, there are these playlists that are personalized, meaning that Mike's version of the same playlist will be a little bit different than mine based on my listening habits. And I think that's where they can feed some of these tracks in. So, it just proves that theory that if you're an early adopter, you're going to have more benefits from discovery mode. And, the latecomers, maybe not so much. But look, as a music marketer, I'm looking for anything, any tool, any arrow in my quiver that will help an artist. And it's always, evolving and changing. 18 months ago, it might have been Instagram stories ads that drive to a DSP, and now reels are really overperforming. But it's all changing and dynamic and cyclical. And this looks really cool, in theory, but I can see the point of people who say, but yeah, you're basically paying for play by giving up that revenue in a situation where, as we all know, you don't make a lot of revenue from streaming anyway. But I would argue that if you're a developing artist, I think that sometimes it's more important to give up that revenue to gain that engagement and audience if you can.
Yeah. This article ends with saying, as you mentioned earlier, Jay, certain people are kind of putting an artist's entire catalog in at once, and that is messing the entire idea up. So, but
I think
it says here, another manager who agrees that discovery mode is going to get absolutely flooded is still eager to take advantage of it while he can. He said, "This is the golden age for this right now. I think this is an excuse for Spotify to pay people less, and they're not paying people much to begin with. But an artist in the development stage needs everything they can get." And
there it is. There it is.
There we go. And we've seen that, that's essentially been the argument for lots of things historically that have been done that maybe are just a skosh sketchy, but we will continue to pay attention to how it rolls out and if it rolls out in a different form, because that's the thing about flooding with full catalogs into it. That's something that Spotify can easily modify and forbid from happening. So my guess is,
and I think they should.
Yes, absolutely.
If it's going to work, I think it's got to be selective, and maybe as a label or a distributor, there are limits to what the number of tracks are that you can put into the program, and maybe that could help keep everybody fresh and keep those algorithms doing the right thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, let's jump over to another Billboard story, Jay. Why are there so few new hits in 2022? I found this article fascinating because, I don't really pay that close attention to what is considered a hit these days, like big, gigantic radio hits, streaming hits. I'm out of that demographic. So, it's not something that I basically necessarily say. But as this article starts out, it says, if you've been looking to catch up on the hottest new songs released in 2022, you wouldn't find them towards the top of the Billboard Hot 100 lately. While the Hot 100 measures the biggest songs in the country every week, the chart has been absolutely dominated by holdovers from 2021, some of which didn't begin their chart runs in 2022 at all. And so it says, in fact, if you look at last week's chart, April 9th, more than 3 months into the calendar year, you'll find more songs in the top 10 and the top 20 that were released in 2020.
Yeah.
Than in 2022.
Let's think about that for a second, because what you and I talked about last week was, remember, catalog is considered 18 months or older.
Yes.
And what we're referring to here is a lot of these songs are staying longer. And is that catalog or is that frontline? And I would argue that that is still frontline just because it's 18 months, and John Fleckenstein, who's the chief operating officer at RCA, said, we've been seeing this trend for over, quite a few years now. He believes that the contemporary predominance of streaming is simply more accurately reflecting the way listeners have likely been consuming music. Yeah. He says, I would imagine if you look at someone's consumption, it looks a little bit like a bell curve where they start to discover the song and then they get excited about it and they listen to it a lot, for a period of time. But I think that when you do that across millions of people, you see this very long tail and you see songs last a very long time. And I think that's what you're seeing on the charts. And I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it was a little different last year. And I think, it's probably, as the article points out, it will probably kind of adjust itself as we get further into this year. That they've got a lot of stuff coming,
right?
But he said, talking about kind of radio support and stuff like that, it says, while radio support is lasting longer than ever, it's also currently taking a while to kick in for songs that have already proven through other metrics to be culturally impactful. They talk about culturally impactful a lot. And this is the head of A&R over at Epic, Ezekiel Lewis. He says believes that that's kind of contributing to the current dearth of 2022 hits from actually this year. He says as time goes on, we're increasingly in more of a kind of show and prove era of record releases, whereby the gatekeepers are increasingly looking to the digital space to see the cultural relevance of a track. So you put a record out, you become sticky in the digital space, and then things that really help affect the Billboard chart, like radio audience, they kind of lag behind. He says it's not until you get synchronicity between the digital and cultural aspects of a record, which is fascinating. Yeah. That's really talking about the cultural aspects of a record. I love that.
Yeah, it flies in the face of what I kind of assumed was going on, and that is that in this kind of TikTok-driven world that things are disposable and they don't last very long. But according to this article, things are actually staying around longer, at least right now. It says, though streaming may be supreme in the marketplace right now, the top of the Hot 100 this year has arguably looked more reflective of the radio landscape, where the biggest songs are staying stronger for longer as dictated by audience research. God, I can't talk today. Songs just aren't dying. They're lasting forever, says Eric Bradley, assistant program director at a CHR station in Chicago, WBBM. He says, Save Your Tears will not stop researching. You just think it's got to be gone. It's got to be gone. And every week it still sits up there on the top of 2 or 3 positions. Woman by Doja Cat, same thing. They're still among, their audience's very, very favorite songs that they could possibly play.
Yeah, and talking about TikTok, they mention a little further in, it says TikTok is still throwing up hits, but the question is it going to the level that it went to before? He said there was a run from 2019 to mid 2000 to 2020 when something went on that platform, it went. And this guy was saying, and I think to a large extent, you can still attribute most new breakthroughs to TikTok. We just don't know if they're as ubiquitous or so dominant on the platform that they translate in the same way as they were before. So is TikTok slightly cooling down? In terms of its impact?
I don't think so. They talk about how it's more spread out now. It's not cooling down. It's just, in terms of minting new hits, it's also resurrecting old ones. I mean, everybody points to Fleetwood Mac, Dreams and those types of things with catalog, that it's not just that dance craze, Lil Nas X kind of thing, that it's now just broader and more spread out. And I think that's probably pretty accurate. I mean, TikTok is super interesting because there are some songs that really connect, and then there are others that get a lot of plays but don't necessarily connect. So it's timing, it's what's going on in the video, it's the clip of the song. Yeah, it's a little luck too.
Absolutely. But one of the paragraphs here kind of resonated with me. It says it's taking longer and longer for people and songs to get critical mass. So I think these resurgent records, talking about that, we're going to see a lot more and more of that stuff. But, you and I talk about how many, especially relative to the time that we were sort of the pre-streaming era, you had such a fixed number of songs that you're competing with, basically, when you're releasing records. And it's when you talk to your kids or young people that are listening and streaming music, they have so many different choices and options and things that are out there. They're just the voluminous amount of new music that's coming into their playlist is just dramatic. And so it makes sense that all of these things are taking longer because there's just such a gigantic wave of stuff that you can listen to. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. There's just so much music being uploaded every day. And what you find in the data is that the attention span is getting smaller and smaller. And we see it with marketing. It used to be you'd want a concept video. Then you want kind of a teaser video. And now you're getting down to reels. And and TikTok and Canvas, which is 8 seconds, you're getting to these little bite-sized chunks for people because they don't have the attention span. And if you ever want to see some interesting data, look at your YouTube analytics and take a look at, you can look at any video that you've uploaded and see a graph that shows where the audience is dropping off. And the reason that's important is because you get paid on 30 seconds. Right. So there's a line in that graph that shows you where that 30 seconds is. And typically, a quarter of your audience is gone before that 30-second mark, which is crazy to me. But rarely do you see much more than 10, 15% at the end. People they'll watch it, but then they'll just kind of watch a piece of it and then move on, because I think they're kind of trained by all of these, TikTok short little digestible videos that they don't really have much of an attention span anymore.
It's kind of like junk food, It's like it's you get that immediate buzz. Ooh, this is delicious. It's God, the more you eat, it's like, yeah, it's not so good. Anybody got any spinach? Yeah. But but to the to the original sort of topic of the article about lots of things that are hits right now in quotation marks really might have been around as far back as 2 years ago. This says, but as the weather warms, some of the persistent hits from 2021 and 2020 will finally start to melt away. Someone was saying, I feel like those older hits are starting to kind of slow a little bit. I'm hoping that that's what happens because, as a music fan and a person who loves new artists and new projects and all of that, I want to see some fresh new life coming into play too. But at the same time, I also want to make sure that my brands are playing hit songs. He didn't say bands, he said brands.
Yeah.
It's telling, isn't it?
Sure
so I'm
is.
a little bit of a pickle in the whole thing, but I feel like there's a lot of great material on the horizon. So look for more big hits. But it's fascinating to see, like you said, it really flies in the face of what we in the industry consider a catalog, and that really needs to change. And we can kind of debate the number, but I think 18 months is still way too short of a time to call something catalog, and as if it's a sort of a heritage record.
Yeah, I agree. I think I mentioned last week, I had read an article where one industry exec was saying maybe it should be based on velocity and not by age. Yes. And I think that makes a lot of sense. But yeah, fascinating article, really great piece in Billboard by Andrew Unterberger. Thank you, Andrew. That was really cool.
Indeed. Well, the next article, too, is when we start talking about some of these numbers, it's going to be pretty remarkable. This is out of Music Business Worldwide. And this is talking about, by Tim Ingham, no less, Latin music is on course to generate over $1 billion in the U.S. in 2022. So, when you talk about trends, this has certainly been a trend that is bubbling. No, I wouldn't even say bubbling under, that has just been on a gigantic trajectory up.
Yeah.
And it's really only in the last 5 years.
It's crazy. And I want to take a quick moment to just gush over Tim Ingham. I'm such a huge fan of Tim Ingham, and I listen to the podcast that he does. I've been following Music Business Worldwide, and I think he's the founder, but he is just on top of all of this. And what I love about this article is it really points out how Tim approaches these stories is they do their own research, and they take these reports by the IFPI and the RIAA, and they look at the data, and they look at how it's trending, and then they compare it to previous years. And especially with Latin music, it shows you just how massive it's become.
Stunning is really the best word. So, as a kind of a data point, well, by the way, they are forecasting this because they were saying that in 2021, Latin generated $886.1 million on a retail basis in the U.S.
Right
now, so that haul was more than a third of the year previous. So from 2020 to 2021, it rose a little over 35%.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's massive.
Yeah, so it's not going to take much it would be only a rise of a little over almost 13% to get to 1 billion in 2022. And so Tim is forecasting that it will in fact do that. But as he said, considering that Latin music's US revenues rose by almost 20% year over year in 2020, 28.5% year over year in 2019, you are talking about unbelievable growth. I mean, it's stunning. And I guess it is to be expected, but it is, boy, when you look at those numbers, you're just like, yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah. And when I first saw those numbers, I was thinking, well, the whole industry is growing. But then when you compare it against the industry or just look at it market share, in 2019, Latin music had a little under 5% market share. The next year, it went to 5.4% market share. But this last year, it went to almost 6% market share. So it's not just that a rising tide lifts all boats. It's that it's overperforming and it's getting more of its share of that pie.
Yeah, as they say, driven by superstars like Bad Bunny, Becky G, and Anita, streaming revenues from Latin music in the U.S. totaled $857 million in 2021, making up 97% of total Latin revenues.
Wow,
big number. And but we see this is the Latinization of music, of everything in our country. So it's when you look at just sort of general demographics, it makes total sense. And when you see those jaw-dropping numbers, those rises year over year, it's unreal.
Yeah, if you look at just streaming and not physical or downloads, which are still hanging in there, every dollar generated in the U.S. From streaming last year, for every dollar, around 1 in every 14 was generated by Latin music. So it's becoming bigger and bigger. And yes, you pointed out, Bad Bunny, who's just massive. We talked about the touring revenue a couple of weeks ago. We talked about just the incredible amount of revenue he's made on touring and merch, and now seeing how he's driving a lot of the streaming when it comes to Latin music. It's really phenomenal that it's being driven by just a few artists.
Right. And it's funny you mentioned Bad Bunny. Is it me? I just feel like I only learned about Bad Bunny like 24 months ago, maybe. I mean, it's that rise seems super fast. I probably just wasn't paying attention. But when you look at his touring numbers, and we've talked in the past about those, oh my God, the guy is just printing money.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. They said in a year where when Bad Bunny was the most streamed artist in the world, not just for Latin music, the most streamed artist in the world, stars like Becky G that you mentioned, Anita, they had chart-topping hit after hit too. An audience joyfully flocked to Latin-powered stadiums and arenas, to see these live performances as they ramp back up. Latin label teams and artists continued soaring to new heights. So it's definitely on our radar now. Remember, we had someone reach out to us a while back saying, why don't you cover Latin music a little bit more? And as we looked at it a little more closely, we realized that we were missing the boat, that it is just a juggernaut.
Yeah. They talk, too, about ad-supported and on-demand platforms. And it says, finally, let's take a look at a longtime stronghold for Latin music in the U.S., which is ad-supported on-demand streaming platforms, including YouTube and Spotify's free tier. They said across this type of streaming platform, Latin music generated $187 million in the U.S. in 2021. Again, up 46% year on year. And they say that according to Music Business Worldwide's analysis of RIAA figures, this meant that Latin music accounted for 10.62% of all revenue generated by such platforms in the States last year.
That's those free tiers.
Yes, but that is fascinating that Latin music can take a tenth of that revenue here in the U.S. That's remarkable, and it's interesting to see that is a super big stronghold for Latin music in general. Not surprising, probably, but very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, I'll just put a fine point on this. If you're not following Tim Ingham on Music Business Worldwide, you need to do that. But listen to his podcast. He's my hero, man. He just he and his team, they just dig into the numbers and they do their own forecasting. The headline here is Latin music is on course to generate over 1 billion in the US in 2022. And the reason he can say that with some confidence is they look at the data, they look at the trends, they look at the numbers, and there are just a handful of those people out there like Glenn Peoples at Billboard or Sherry Who or, Chris Castle. There are people out there who are really digging into this stuff for us, and so we don't have to. So
yes, no, they do.
Stuff.
They do God's work. It's good, really
yes,
fascinating. But that's not enough. That's not all we're going to hear from Tim. So this next article, also on Music Business Worldwide, also from Tim, is again what we sort of talked about with Merck this last week, which is this story. Judges in the U.S. have hinted that the mechanical royalty rate paid to publishers and songwriters for vinyl sales should rise. The major labels have come out swinging, and this
is a different twist to a story we've been talking about a lot. The Copyright Royalty Board and this ongoing battle to make sure that publishers and songwriters then are paid fairly. But this one really starts to focus on something that really we weren't talking a lot about, and that's that 9.1 cent, payment for physical, where you're talking about vinyl, CD, and in some cases even in download. But they talk a lot to our friend Chris Castle, and you've heard me talk about Chris. He's got a website called Music Technology Policy that I read every week. It's just absolutely the best coverage about this battle over streaming, and now CD and vinyl payouts.
Yeah, and it's worth sort of reviewing if you're a listener to this podcast and you haven't been in the business or been in performing for a long time. Back in the physical days, the mechanical royalty, which is the publishing royalty paid for a physical product, call it a CD, was 9.1 cents per song. So whoever wrote the songs got that. It wasn't encumbered by any sort of recoupment thing. That was paid by Record One, and that 9.1 cents was put in by Congress. So it was not something that you could change. And also, but labels back in those days would only typically pay for 10 songs on a record. So as somebody pointed out to me, if you notice that all of Bob Dylan's albums, classic albums, most of them had only 10 songs, that's why, because he and his manager had a very good knowledge base of how publishing worked.
Yeah.
So that's but that 9.1 cents has been around for ages. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But that's it's funny to be talking about physical again. But as we mentioned, vinyl sales were approaching $1 billion last year, and there is a very real market for physical sales when you're talking about. And as we also mentioned that might have been. That number could have been considerably larger given the challenges of production of vinyl at the moment and how the system is just overloaded. So that's a big number. But if you talk about 9.1 cents, that has been in effect since
forever.
Forever.
Yeah. And think about this. It hasn't even been adjusted for inflation.
Nope.
Which is ridiculous. And now, we talk about vinyl. Vinyl isn't the same as it was back in the day. Now it's not selling for $10 or $12. Even, if you count for inflation, it's like $25, $30. It's a premium item. Yes. And yet these people who are writing these songs are getting 9.1 cents still. And this was a really interesting battle here because we're still really looking at about 83% of the business being streaming. And so this has been kind of ignored a little bit. And what Tim Ingham points out is that his readers will remember that the NMPA, the National Music Publishers Association, currently locked in a legal battle with Spotify and other streaming services to increase the pay, via mechanical royalties that songwriters get from these platforms in the U.S. Locked in two battles, to be more precise: the Copyright Royalty Board, which you and I talk about weekly, they ultimately set the percentage of a streaming company's revenues that it must pay out in royalties to songwriters in the U.S., and it does so every few years, right? 4 years ago, the CRB ruled that the streaming services should up that percentage from 10.5% to 15.1%, for the years 2018 through 2022, which we're almost at the end of. And it's been, challenged. So it hasn't even been, it's still at that old rate today, right? Because it's still being challenged. So the likes of Spotify, they're appealing that ruling, and a final post-appeal decision from that CRB is expected to coming soon. The NMPA is also battling Spotify and everybody else when it comes to the mechanical rates paid to songwriters for streaming services for the year 2023 through 2027. That's what they're debating right now, and that's just getting underway. So it's really this battle between, and we talk about this with Merck. So I encourage everybody to listen to that Merck interview, because he goes into it a lot better and more eloquently than I can. But he talks about where it started and who's really standing to gain from this battle. Because right now there's a finite amount of revenue in that pie, and we need to slice it up fairly. Now, I would argue that streaming is probably undervalued, that we're paying too little for it, and they should be paying more for all of the value that you get. But putting that aside for a second, and Merck will talk about this, that pie, the way it's sliced up, really needs to change.
Well, and one of his points that he continually brings up is you have this inherent conflict, which is 3 of the biggest publishers are owned by 3 of the biggest recorded music companies. So that's a problem. That is a really big issue.
Think about that. Yeah.
Think about that. It's like I'm trying to think of an analogy in another industry, but that really is a gigantic conflict through all of this. Is how hard are those 3 biggest publishers going to push when their parent company is actually on the other side of it saying, no, we don't want any rise. And one of the things the article point out is that the NMPA, if you're going to take on the 9.1% when it comes to royalties for physical downloads, so therefore you're taking on the major music companies, or if you're going to talk about the streaming royalty and then you're taking on the DSPs, those are expensive battles to fight. And those monies, so in many ways, the NMPA has to kind of pick their battles, so to speak. And I think that's the most heartbreaking thing I read about this article, is that, in many ways, they just don't have the money to fight on both fronts.
Yeah. It was there was a settlement that was put forth, and it was rejected March 30th. And CRB's chief copyright royalty judge, Suzanne Barnett, wrote, 16 years at a static rate, that 9.1 cents, is unreasonable. Let me say that again. 16 years at that static rate is unreasonable, if for no other reason than the continuous erosion of the value of the dollar by persistent inflation that recently has increased significantly. In other words, if government-measured U.S. inflation from 2006 to 2021 was applied to that 9.1 rate, songwriters and publishers today would be getting 12, not 9.1. They'd be getting 12 cents for each track that appeared on a physically purchased disc or a download.
Right. And again, that's not a raise. That's just taking into account inflation. She actually said something interesting. She said, no party opposing the present settlement has evinced actual or implied evidence of misconduct other than the corporate structure of the record labels on the one hand and the publishers on the other. While corporate relationships alone do not suffice as probative evidence of wrongdoing, they do provide smoke. The judges must therefore assure themselves that there is new fire. So you can see that the judges, that is, are kind of, when your dog kind of looks at you with the crooked, and they move their head when they, you got to think that the judges are kind of looking at all this and going, wait a minute, this really is kind of jacked up. So
yeah,
which as this article is written out really interestingly, where he kind of does these little asides. But you can see, first of all, this is really dense stuff, and it is really hard to keep the players to understand what's going on in the players, and I think obviously that is by design. But I think it's just it is so blatantly
unfair.
Unfair, yeah.
Well, it doesn't sound like a lot of money, 9.1 cents versus 12 cents. On its face, that doesn't sound like a lot. But Billboard did a calculation about that. And if the record labels would have paid that 12 cents instead of that 9.1 cents, it would have added up last year to $42.4 million to songwriters and publishers. $42.4 million.
And as Merck says, and if you listen to the episode, you'll hear him say, it's like, without the songwriters, without the songs, our business is not a business. And yet at every step along the way, we continue as an industry to just pound them into the sand and just
it's just
galling.
It's unfair. But the good news is that there are people like Merck and there are people like Chris Castle and the Copyright Royalty Board. I think things are definitely moving in the right direction. We talk about that $42.4 million that they would have earned just with keeping up with inflation. Think about it in these terms, that like the Universal Music Group is generating over $10 billion across its global business every year. $10 billion. And then you look at that, that $42.4 million, that amount, it doesn't seem as big. It sounds like it's fair.
It's a rounding error when you look at the giant numbers that you're talking about, and it's freaking galling, that they are pushing back so hard and they cannot make it get songwriters the money they deserve.
Yeah, I think that one of the leaders in this space, and we talk about him on the podcast quite a bit, is my friend Chris Castle, from Music Technology Policy, music business attorney, and they brought him up in this article. Mm-hmm. It says Chris Castle is the aforementioned attorney representing independent songwriters who have submitted filings to the CRB over the past year. And it says Castle also runs Music Technology Policy, right? And they feature regular and perceptive updates on the progress of Phono Records 4, which is the CRB. Castle argues that the CRB may ultimately decide it has a headache on its hands when it comes to vertical integration of publishing and records within the same three major corporate groups. As Castle puts it, what do you do when a willing buyer and a willing seller are the same person? Yeah. That's kind of what you alluded to a second ago.
Absolutely. And they quote him saying, "I just don't understand why the major record companies would do this because they've built up so much goodwill lately." And they certainly have. And it is really bad.
Forgiving debt, right, for unrecouped catalog artists. That was amazing.
Yep, absolutely. And so it is pretty... It's I think it's tone deaf, certainly no pun intended, and I think it's just galling that we have this continued battle when, especially when Universal just went public last year and they are just sitting on a gigantic pile of money. And as we've said and we've talked so much about, what is Spotify valued at? What is Universal Music valued at? All of these valuations have just gone through the roof. And yet, again, this entire business is built on the backs of songwriters. And yet, we cannot get them even a raise to even cover inflation.
Right.
It sucks.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to happen. It's going to be really interesting because already the CRB is pushing back a little bit. And I think that's a good thing. I remain cautiously optimistic. I think that we are going to start paying songwriters more fairly, but as Merck points out, this is going to take time, and and he doesn't fault Daniel Ek. I mentioned to him that Daniel Ek's this billionaire, and he doesn't fault Daniel Ek for getting rich from his invention or his platform. But the thing that bothers me, I think, is when I see. Like gas prices are really high right now, and these companies are having record profits, and that doesn't balance to me. These grocery stores, some of them are just jacking their prices up through the pandemic and having record profits, right? And that's kind of the way I see it with some of these recorded music companies is you're having record profits right now because streaming is predictable. and a lot of people are doing it. There's over 500 million people who are on streaming services, and it's still growing, and there's still markets to come by. It's time for us to sit down at the table and look at some of these things, as you point out, that have been in place forever.
Decades. Absolutely. Well, it's just not ethical. And it's very disappointing when you see some of these titans of industry that are pushing back so hard. And again, and it costs money to litigate, and they've got money to if they got plenty of money to litigate this and to push back on it, and yet they don't want to. Whatever.
If you ever want to dig deep into this stuff, for our listeners that really are interested and want to dig into the minutia here, there is no better place than Music Technology Policy, the website. Chris Castle does some amazing work there, and will spell it out for you. For me, sometimes my head's just spinning because of all of this. But the good news is that it's not in the back rooms anymore. They're shining a light on it.
Yes.
And it's, it goes before the Copyright Royalty Board, which is basically a 3-panel judge. And, maybe we'll see some changes on the horizon. Before we say goodbye to everybody, just watch your feed for this bonus episode that's coming. It's just a little gift from Mike and I to you. We were honored to sit down with Merck. I have a great deal of respect for him. What a music fanatic.
Yep.
I could sit and talk to him, and I know you could too, for hours, just about the concerts you've gone to, the albums you listen to. To me, that just heightens my respect for him because he's such a music freak.
He comes from a great place, gigantic fan of music. So
yep.
On that note, we shall wrap up episode number 88 of the podcast. Thanks, everyone, for listening. We certainly appreciate it. Of course, big thanks to the Music Business Association, to Hypebot and Bands in Town, our good friends and folks that make it happen for us. We certainly appreciate it. And on behalf of my good buddy Jay Gilbert and myself, thanks for listening, and we really appreciate it. We will see you next time on the Your Morning Coffee podcast.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.